Hello, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to episode 52 of the ESG Show. Now, the exciting news this morning was that I was planning to get Winston Churchill's avatar to present today's show, but unfortunately he was busy, so you're stuck with me. Now, generative AI, it's a word that we keep hearing, but what is the difference between generative AI and other forms of AI? Now, I'm not a fan of jargon, but I was reading a paper the other day and it came up with a phrase that I wasn't familiar with. I don't know whether you might know this word. I looked it up in the dictionary. It was so technical it wasn't even in the dictionary, and the word was bullshit. Now, a recent paper by Michael, you have to excuse me while I lean in close to read that, Michael Hicks, James Humphreys and Joe Slater, stated, recently there has been considerable interest in the large language models, machine learning systems which produce human-like text and dialogue. Applications of these systems have been plagued by persistent inaccuracies in their output. These are often called AI hallucinations. We argue that these falsehoods and the overall activity of their large language models is better understood as bullshit. It went on to say the models are in an important way different to the truth of their outputs. Okay, so now I don't want to get all cynical on you, but if these large language models or LLMs don't always tell the truth, I reckon that makes them a little bit more human. Can you trust generative AI 100%? No, you can't. Can you trust Wikipedia 100%? Either, no. But then again, I think I would trust Wikipedia more than most newspapers. And I think I'd be more likely to believe, say, ChatGPT than a lot of humans. And certainly, I think I would trust it over a politician. We all lie. Not always deliberately. I have lied 1 trillion times today, which is, of course, a lie. Sometimes our lies are meant to be obviously untrue, which I guess is what sarcasm is. And of course, not everyone gets sarcasm. And I would imagine generative AI is particularly bad at understanding sarcasm. But in a world that isn't perfect, I often think generative AI is a better harbinger of truth than most sources I can think of, especially politicians. And I have this little dream that one day we will hear a generative AI tool connected to us through a kind of like an earpiece. And when we listen to politicians, it will whisper in our ear and say, that's not true what you've just heard. But everything has a catch. And not only does generative AI lie like humans do, it also needs feeding. And it needs to feed on data. And that begs several questions. Is there enough data to feed AI, or will it, as it were, run out of puff, unable to change the world the way its supporters say because of a lack of data? Then there is ESG. Is there enough data to feed AI so it can be truly effective in the realm of ESG? Then there's a carbon dioxide cost. AI needs data to collect, store, and process data, so you need a lot of energy. So anyway, let's bring on our guests today. On the show today, we have Don Kasper. Hello, Don. How are you this morning?
Hello, Michael. Good to be back on the show again.
Great to have you here. So Don is the co-founder and SVP, Senior Vice President of Liminal Data, an AI-driven sustainability platform. And also we have Sue. Hello, Sue.
Hey there. Good to be back with you, Michael.
Pleasure to have you, Sue. Sue Turner OBE is an AI and data governance expert and is a member of a select group, 100 Brilliant Women in AI. So before we go any further, can I ask you both to define what generative AI is and how it's different from other types of AI? Sue, do you fancy going first on that one? You're on mute, Sue, sorry.
various different types of artificial intelligence that are out there. They all have one thing in common. They're about computers finding patterns hidden in large amounts of data and then using those patterns to predict, to personalize, or to automate things. So Google Maps we're very familiar with, and lots of people think when they use Street View, it's actually showing them what the little car with its cameras on top picked up as it drove down their street. It's not. It's actually using artificial intelligence and patterns to stitch together the images in ways that seem very natural to us. Generative AI is different because what it does is, rather than just producing an image or just producing some sort of simple words, it actually gives us incredible outputs. That could be audio, it could be text, it could be videos, again, based on patterns and in response to the prompts that we've put in. So that's in a nutshell, finding those patterns and then giving us incredible output.
Okay, thank you for that, Sue. Don, would you like to have a go? How would you define generative AI, and how would you say it's different from other forms of AI?
Sure. Yeah, I'd say that Sue's definition was actually excellent. Where I would expand on that is really on the keyword generative. So more traditional forms of AI, or what we'd generally refer to as machine learning, really is about the pattern recognition. So it performs really discrete tasks well. So it's using patterns, using different strategies that are pre-fed to it with certain bounds and within certain limits. Generative AI really creates something new and really generating something that didn't exist before. So we're starting to see all different contexts. One of the ones that you kind of see most prevalently right now is the generation of text. So when we talk about large language models, as an example, it's about creating text that didn't exist before. So it's not just regurgitating and finding patterns from previous data and then regurgitating kind of the best known pattern. It's about finding new patterns and creating a new output that obviously has an implication for how we can use it in the future.
Okay, so it creates something new, it generates something new. Is that why it's called generative AI, you think?
Presumably so, yes.
Okay. We've had a couple of comments already, and I thought it'd be quite nice to deal with them as they come in. Lokesh B. I do wonder what 10 times more productivity gives us. More things we don't want or more choice. Production and limits to growth are more in focus than efficiency and optimization. I don't think it's that so much as a question as a statement, but oh, I beg your pardon, that was from Ray replying to Lokesh B. But it's an interesting thought, maybe something we can return to. Kabir says, I'm on holding on AI liability ideathon in December. Would anyone be interested in taking part? So there's an invitation there. Anyone interested in that? There's the link. Have a look at the comments. Right. I thought we could play a game of hot and cold. And we'll start with the question: is AI overhyped? Don.
Sure. I think I understand the game here, but I would say hot. So I'm a big believer that AI is not overhyped, that there's a lot of potential there. I'm very pro AI. Where I'm cold against AI and where it could be a problem is really the marketing and how companies are mixing terminology and really causing confusion in the marketplace. I think what we see today for our prospective customers and just going out to talking to different organizations, it's clear that there's a high level of need for education around AI. I think a lot of people don't truly understand what it is, what it can be used for, and there's just kind of a lot of overhype in the marketing and the language used around AI. But I think as a technology, I'm very pro AI and believe that we've just scratched the surface, that there's going to be a number of use cases that we haven't thought of yet that could be beneficial to society at large.
Okay, thank you for that. Eric, a regular viewer of the show, said I had a problem this morning explaining a Bentel man on LinkedIn that ChatGPT was not calculating things. He was convinced it could sense that when prompting a calculus, he had an answer. Okay. So is generative AI?
Yeah, so I agree with Don that I think generative AI has got a heck of a long way to go. McKinsey reckon generative AI is going to add $4.4 trillion to global wealth in the next few years. And they also think 65% of organizations are already regularly using generative AI. I think actually they are way underestimating things in many ways there. I work with lots of organisations who haven't even started scratching the surface about what they use these tools for. Most leaders don't understand its potential, and like that comment just now, a lot of people don't understand that it's a giant prediction machine. They think somehow it's surfacing truth. So there's a lot of way to go before leaders really understand what its potential is and start using it effectively.
Okay, well, I think, wasn't it somebody said making predictions is especially difficult, especially about the future, or something, or words to that effect. Okay, now this is a big question. Normally I ask you to answer these hot and cold questions quite quickly, but as it's such a big question, maybe you can dwell on it a little bit longer. Is there enough data out there to feed a genuine AI revolution? I was watching a video the other day and someone was saying, it's not going to be able to do what people say it is because there's not enough data to feed into it. I thought that was an interesting take. I'd be interested in your views on that. Who wants to go first? Hands up, anyone? Sue, do you want to go first? Oh, Don, you put your hands up.
Sure. Sorry, Sue, about that. Yeah, so I'm very hot on this. I actually think that there is enough data. I think there's actually more data that can be processed by AI right now, and the growth is exponential. Currently, as of today, there's over 400 million terabytes of data that are entering the internet. So that's new content, new data that's available for LLMs. A lot of the LLMs have consumed a vast amount of data from the internet as a source. So if you think about, if today there's 400 million terabytes, you can go back and do the math. And going back to the 90s, 80s, and 70s and 60s even, just the content that's available on the internet, all the uploads that have happened, all the human texts that have been read and digitized. I actually think that the problem is actually compute power. And it goes back to a point earlier you made, is that there's a carbon problem. So it's more about the power needed to processing, storage limits. There's other limits in place. I don't think data is the constraint here. I think that for most of the tasks that we've been able to think of that AI can solve, there's sufficient data out there. I think with more data, with more resources, if you think about things, when we talk about power used for data centers, it's not just power and carbon and things like electricity. It's sourcing that from renewable sources. There's an impact on water and the cooling needs of data centers. Those are all physical constraints right now. But I think, data is not the problem. That's going to continue to be exponential. If you think about what AI is good at, as we talked about it being really a generation engine, is that it's also creating more data. So data is going to continue to be exponential. So I'm very hot on this topic, thinking that data is not the problem. If there are any restrictions, it would be more on the power and compute needs for AI.
Okay, thank you for that. And Sue, is there enough data out there?
Yeah, I'm hot on this one as well. There is enough data out there. There has been a trend in recent year or so, 18 months, for organisations to say, well, we'll create synthetic data. We'll sort of use the computer itself to create some data which we can then feed in, because for whatever reason we haven't got enough data of the right type, or there's too much personal information in there and we want to take that out. But that's a bit like the snake eating its own tail. If we start feeding in fabricated data, which may or may not be truly representative of the world as it is, into these machines to build AI tools, then we run that risk that we're just making the world narrower and narrower and building in more bias and more incorrect assumptions about our world. So when I did my master's degree, we were taught that more data is always better than a more complicated algorithm. And I think there's some truth in that, but I think before LLMs, before this real strong focus that's starting to come through now about the environmental impact, as Don was talking about there, of some of these tools, that was what we used to say. I think now we have to change that and say, actually being efficient with our data and making sure our data really represents the world that we're trying to portray is more important. So yeah, a huge amount more data out there. Think of your kettle and your toaster suddenly being linked to the internet. This is ridiculous amounts of data, but what will we do with it? How will we use it? Time will tell.
Okay, thank you for that. I guess, I don't think it's that different from how we learn from data, don't we? As babies, it's, when we're taught to read, we're put in front of colours. If you don't see a certain colour when you're very, very young, you can never see that colour. That's a form of data, isn't it? And to say that AI can't progress because there's not enough data is like saying humanity can't progress because there's not enough data. And to me, it doesn't make sense, because data is what surrounds us, I think.
Yeah, I think Sue brought up a good point too. When I mentioned the internet, I'm thinking that as a singular input to LLM, but there's the IoT aspect. So if you think about the number of tea kettles, like she mentioned, but also cameras, the number of Zoom calls that are being generated per day. There's technology revolutions happening, kind of the whole work from home era from COVID. If you think about the amount of video content that's being generated just because of a shift in how we work, right? These are all variable inputs that are ultimately getting digitized and becoming publicly available in some cases to train LLM. So, right, when I mentioned we have 400 million terabytes of data entering the internet today, you can think of how that's going to exponentially increase with the advent of IoT and other forms of really input of digital sources.
Okay.
And we need to be aware that this kind of drive to constantly create more data isn't necessarily a good thing. There's a machine that's feeding that. This capitalist machine, the data-hungry machine, where our data becomes something we give away for free, and we don't really value it. And yet it has enormous value in commercial context, and in context of training models, and in context of selling us more stuff. So then we have to question whether this constant drive and assumption that more data is always a good thing is actually the future that we want to create. So there's a whole societal argument to be had about saying, actually, perhaps we should not just gobble up more data and produce more data just because we can.
And this brings me on to my next question, which both of you have kind of touched on, but it'd be good just to focus on it just for a short answer, which is the carbon footprint of generative AI. How big an issue is that, or is it an issue with a solution? Dom?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm lukewarm on this. I do think it's a problem that cannot be ignored, but I think it's a temporary problem. I think one of the problems that generative AI specifically has created was just how fast it came to market. Right. So you can go out and for $20 a month in the US, you can buy a license to ChatGPT and begin using AI today. What that means is that the increase of AI usage and kind of the related data centers really kind of came out of nowhere over the last 2 years and has an exponential increase in data center usage, which ultimately translates to energy and water usage. But I do see a lot of innovative solutions coming to market. So whether it's nuclear power, new forms of renewable energy, I think on the compute side, it's being more efficient with calculations. But I think this is a common problem with technology, is that something comes in, causes a sea wave of change. And the interesting spin that I have on it is perhaps that we could use AI to actually solve this problem and find ways to reduce that carbon footprint.
So,
yeah, there was a report out last summer that was fascinating. It showed that data center energy use in Ireland is rising exponentially, perhaps not unsurprising, but it said that by 2026, just around the corner, the energy demand for these data centers in Ireland is going to double, and it'll account for 1/3 of the country's total electricity demand. It's just monstrous. That's huge. So of course there's got to be pushback. So all of us, whether we're as individual consumers or as businesses that are buying in tools that have AI built into them, we need to push back to the organizations that are using all this energy and say, hey, how are you trying to be more efficient in your use of energy and your use of water and your use in all sorts of other materials as well? So I think if we as consumers are wise to this and push back from the start, it won't get as bad than if we just passively accept and say, oh, well, we just want to use the tool, we don't care what the impact is. So let's push back from the start.
Okay, I guess Ireland's a pretty windy place. At least it was when I went there, and that means there's a lot of potential to generate electricity from wind, and if it's generated from renewables, then maybe the electricity cost isn't such an issue. And also, and this is a question for both of you really. It's not something we've discussed, but when you're training AI, is it not possible to sort of time it? So, back in the day, back when we were explorers, when people like Captain Cook was exploring the world, if it wasn't windy, he didn't move very far. So, we were dependent on the wind, and maybe we could see a time in which, okay, it's very sunny, the solar panels are generating a lot of electricity, more electricity than we need. It's a good time to train AI. Or it's quite windy, the wind turbines are going full kilt, we can't possibly use all that energy. good time to train AI. Oh, it's neither windy nor sunny. Let's not do any AI training right now. Is that possible, do you think?
I think it's possible, but the question would be whether companies are prepared to forego some potential competitive advantage that they might not get because they're not running full tilt. So, yeah, at the moment, leaders in this field haven't really shown themselves willing to come second, and so I don't know that they would make those sensible, socially acceptable decisions. But again, if we as consumers push them to do more and to prove themselves, perhaps we'll see a change on that.
It could be reflected in price, I suppose. Don?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, getting into the technical aspects of it, I think time of day doesn't necessarily increase the carbon footprint, other than it may change the mix of renewable energy sources you have. So obviously, the carbon footprint might be the same from a power consumption standpoint. But if you have to start using coal and other power plants during the day because there's not enough, or during the night because there's not enough renewable energy, then that's certainly a problem. I think what's been interesting and a trend I've been following is relocating data centers to colder places. So going up to the Baltic or the Nordic countries where you can greatly reduce the cooling demands of data centers through natural sources and using different heat sinks that way. I think there's a lot of creative ways to solve this problem. But ultimately, it is a problem that needs to be addressed. And to Sue's point, I think, there's creative ways that can do this. I think regulation is going to be key to this as well.
Okay. Yeah, well, I've been swimming in the Baltic and I can indeed confirm it's cold. Okay, so I told somebody the other day that I was Brad Pitt's identical twin brother, which you probably work out was a lie. But generative AI lies as well. I think people realized I was lying when I told them I looked identical to Brad Pitt, but maybe they don't always identify generative AI as lies. How big of an issue is this? Sue, do you want to go first on this one?
Sure. I mean, it's basically it's in the nature of the beast. It's what it's all about. These are giant prediction engines and they make stuff up. So if we call it lying, then it's giving it a kind of context of it somehow being malicious in some way or deliberate. It's not. They just can't help themselves. They make stuff up. So if I feed the whole of Wikipedia and the whole of the internet to a large language model to build it, then inevitably it's going to pick things from it which it thinks are kind of sensible, but they might not be true. And that's what it's giving me in the output. Now, the way to try and tune this and to make it better is when we can feed the context of what we're trying to do to the large language model. So on the AI governance website, we've got a chat bot which is tuned just to answer questions about things it can find on the AI governance website and some other sites that we've let it have access to, which are all about AI ethics and so on. So that's a way that we can contain its ability to make things up into things that are more likely to be true, but it's still inventing stuff because that's what it's designed to do.
I wonder if it will accurately tell us where Santa Claus is at any one moment on Christmas Eve. But Don, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I think it's a good thing that it lies. I think it's scarier to me to think of an all-knowing source of information that can't be wrong. I think it's more about responsible practice of AI, knowing what its limitations are. I think in practice, and I believe we'll get to kind of the responsible frameworks around AI, but it's kind of important to know the accuracy, where it could hallucinate or where it could lie, and ultimately, how that could be used to our advantage. I think lying is more of a human context, so we generally think of poor intention. But I think with AI, it's actually good that it's not an all-knowing being, essentially. But I think it's about knowing those limitations, knowing how to responsibly use it. And more importantly, when you're using AI, being aware of those limitations so that you're not using it unknowingly for misinformation.
Okay, and let's turn to generative AI and ESG. Hot or cold? Don, do you want to go first on that one?
Sure. Yeah, I'm hot on this. Obviously, this is our business, but I think the state of ESG today is very quantitative and qualitative analysis heavy. It's also reporting heavy. So if you think about the people that are in the roles dealing with sustainability and ESG today, a lot of it is sourcing data from different parts of the organization, from perhaps public data sets, so things like climate risk data, It's processing that, which, just to be frank, is not something that a human can do. And when they try, right, use up a lot of resources, a lot of time and money. The process of narrowing that down to things like data-driven narratives that then you can use to communicate to stakeholders within your organization, you can apply to different regulatory frameworks, are all kind of the practical day-to-day things that someone in ESG does. And generative AI is a great application for this. Not to mention, ESG, a lot of times people forget, because we love acronyms, is that it stands for environmental, social, and governance. So when you look at the parts of a company that ESG touches, it's virtually all parts of a company, and then extending beyond to kind of their existence in a business ecosystem, and then as part of society. So there's a large degree of subject matter that a sustainability person has to cover. So really, I like to frame AI as an enhancer, right? It's not a replacer. It's not meant there to replace jobs, but for the people that are doing ESG and sustainability work, it's a critical tool, enhance their capabilities to help them understand the different contexts. They can't be expected to be data scientists and experts in every area of the business. A lot of times ESG teams are cross-functional, very few subject matter experts on sustainability themselves. And then I think beyond reporting, it's about doing. So how do you go beyond compliance and about kind of reporting, communicating efforts, and actually follow through with the goals of sustainability and ESG, which is actually having a beneficial impact to society and the environment at large.
Okay, Sue.
Yeah, I think there's huge opportunity for people to learn how to use these tools and to harness their power to analyze lots of information and produce reports very quickly. So, rather than having to spend months and months putting information together, we should be able to use generative AI tools to very quickly look in real time at how the company's ESG work is giving an impact, positive or negative, through the year, rather than just saying, we've got an annual report to write, 2 months to go to the annual report's due, so we better start drafting something. And you're constantly looking backwards and reporting on things that perhaps happened 6 months, 9 months, or even 12 months ago. So I would hope these tools can be harnessed and we can see them being used much more to give that real-time information, which then can be on a dashboard seen by the chief executive, who's going, hey, hang on a minute, we seem to be having some negative social impacts, for example, at the moment. Why is that? What are we doing? What have we forgotten to do that we used to do a year ago? So that sort of stuff would be really powerful, but we're not doing it yet. It's one for the future.
Okay, thank you, Sue. So you've got a thumbs up there, Sue, from one of our someone watching the show today. It's always nice to get. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I'm a human. I'm a human being, and I'm pretty confident that you two are as well. I'm pretty confident that most of the people watching this show are human. I like to think all of them are humans, actually. And but there are implications of generative AI for society as a whole, for us human beings. What are your thoughts about that? The societal implications of AI. Thoughts, Sue?
Yeah, this worries me more than anything, and it's the reason that I did the master's degree and came into this world of AI, because my background is working in very different organisations, but not on the technical side. But I switched to the technical side because I recognise that data and these powerful tools are concentrating power in the hands of a tiny number of people and organisations, and that really worries me. We're creating a technological elite, and there's a woman called Rachel Colcott who put it brilliantly when she said we need to make sure that AI benefits 8 billion people, not just 8 billionaires. That's it, in a nutshell. We are making some people incredibly powerful, incredibly rich, and we're disenfranchising a whole load of others. And for me, the biggest societal impact is about people not understanding how the tools work and not being able to really harness their power. And that refers back to the conversation we just had. If you think you're using a chatbot, any sort of large language model, and it's finding God's own truth for you, you really trust it. And you shouldn't. As we said, it's making the stuff up. It's a giant prediction engine. So we need to empower people, give them that knowledge and understanding, and not just because they're working in a company where they might use these tools. I'm talking about the poorest people around the world. I'm talking about everybody having knowledge and the ability to opt in or opt out of using these tools. We're a long way from that, and my worry is that as a society we're going to be pushed into accepting these tools by default. In order to take part in society you have to use the tools, and that will impoverish us in many ways. So we are creating a society that's really dependent on tools and blundering into it, and I worry about that. We may come onto it, but politics, America, very dominant, Trump administration coming in, they don't want to regulate use of AI and other tools at the federal level, and that then will give free rein to things to develop as they will over the next 4 years. So uncontrolled development, yeah, it's a worry.
Okay, thank you, Sue. I suppose another way would be to ask the question of generative AI. It's generative AI, is it like the TV program Friends, or is it like the TV program Black Mirror? I suppose that'd be another way of looking at it. Don, the societal implications of generative AI, what are your thoughts?
Sure, yeah, I think Sue is spot on here. I think what I go back to is with great power comes great responsibility. I think the AI itself is neither good nor bad, but right, for every positive use case of AI, there's certainly a counterpart, a potential negative consequence of that. I think the scarier thing to me are the unintended consequences. I liken this to the social media industry, where it seems great to connect people. But over time, obviously, we're discovering kind of the detrimental effects it has on young children, on teenagers, on things like self-image, things that I don't necessarily know or understand if people saw that coming. But I think there's a lot of negative consequences that may not be obvious right now. So I do think regulation is important. Again, with social media, I think that was pretty much unchecked and unregulated for so long that you started to see more of these unintended consequences. I also think that there's a threat with, there are still a lot of industries that are being digitized right now. So companies and organizations and even countries or political engines, right, are really just coming online and being digitized. And kind of the first people to use AI have an extreme advantage, right? And if that's being used for misinformation, if it's being used for nefarious purposes, obviously that's bad. I saw a user question about the 10x productivity. I do think things like income and wealth disparity are going to be an issue. I think right now we've talked about the resources required, which translates to dollars. So the people that are going to be able to take advantage of AI first are going to be the people that have money and have disposable income. If we're talking about individuals, larger businesses. So I think regulation can help moderate that and make sure that there's equality in the use of AI as well.
Okay, thank you. Somebody else giving you the thumbs up there, Don. On the we keep coming to the, seem to be turning to the topic of billionaires. I like that quote you gave earlier, Sue. It needs to be for 8 billion people, not 8 billionaires. And Don, you mentioned about the distribution of wealth. And there's a certain billionaire called Elon Musk. And I'd like to close this game of hot and cold with your thoughts about Mr. Musk. Who wants to go first? Sue, do you want to go first on Elon Musk?
Okay, well, yeah, pretty cold on this one. I think go back a few years and Elon Musk was leading some of the debates about the potential threats, the existential risk to humanity that artificial general intelligence could cause. Now, that's not generative AI that we have today. That's this kind of super intelligence that would be more intelligence than us, sort of out there in the future somewhere. Some of the scientists working on this think it's actually not that far out there in the future. They think maybe 5 or 10 years' time we'll have this super intelligence. My concern is that Elon Musk has kind of changed a little bit on this over the years, and he really does seem to think he's one of the people who should have control over the super intelligence, how it evolves, who makes money from it, and so on. But he hasn't given us evidence of a vision for how he's going to make a better world for us all, how he's going to shape that fairness in society that Don was talking about. And that worries me. Powerful people who've got their hands on levers of power but aren't thinking about the better society. And that's evidence from when Elon Musk was in the UK November last year at the AI Safety Summit, and he was talking there and talked about, in the future, jobs will be optional. You want to work, you can work. If you don't want to work, you don't have to work. Maybe that's right. But what he didn't go on was to expand the theory of what that means for society. How are we going to shape a society so that people can live and have choices in their lives? So yeah, cold on that one. Too much power concentrated in the hands of somebody who isn't showing us a way to shape the world better. Okay,
and Don.
Sure, yeah. In case Elon is watching, I'll first say that he's a great and brilliant innovator and technologist. I think I'm cold on this, very cold on this. I think, I'll give credit where credit's due, where he is an innovator. If you look at the starting of Tesla, really the intent there was to help decarbonize the economy. So I think at one point he had really good intentions. But as Sue mentioned, there is kind of wealth disparity. He is the wealthiest person in the world. He's now involved with politics. I think a lot of statements that he's made in the past around carbon, for instance, carbon emissions, are becoming less clear, and he's muddying the waters a lot right now. I think, right, the scary parts of AI are when you turn to military applications and defense contracting, and when you think about the wealthiest person in the world that seems a little bit unhinged, that also owns a satellite company and a rocket company. You can start to see a pattern that can be very concerning. You mix that with politics and political power. I think that potentially could be a recipe for disaster. I think that's why regulation is extremely important. I'm also more positive that I think it takes more innovation from other people. I think what we'll see is other people step up to the plate and offer counterpoints to Elon Musk, so that his political pull and ultimately his power can be counteracted. It's a little bit unclear kind of what direction he's headed right now. Again, he's a great innovator, great technologist. I wish it was a lot more clear that was going to be used for good and for guidance and really push regulation, but that part's unclear right now.
Okay, thank you for that, Don. I think Elon Musk is a big fan of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, and I seem to recall there's a line in there that many people were unhappy, and the unhappiness was caused by moving pieces. They seem to think the solution involved moving pieces of paper between one another, which was strange because on the whole it wasn't the pieces of paper that were unhappy. But I think that ties in quite nicely with the theme of billionaires. Don, I'd like to have a quick chat with you for a few minutes, if that's okay. Sure. I'm going to say goodbye to you for about 5 minutes, Sue, and then welcome you back. So Don Kasper is the co-founder and SVP of Innovation at Liminal Data. Just bear with me. A sustainability platform that delivers actionable and automates ESG data collection. With nearly 20 years of experience in sustainability, Don began his career as a consulting energy engineer and since built a reputation for creating cutting-edge, data-driven solutions focusing on the sustainability space. A recognized expert in sustainability and data analytics, Don specializes in helping organizations operationalize ESG initiatives, leverage sustainability as a competitive advantage. So, Don, can we expand on the question about how generative AI works with ESG? How can it help?
Sure. Yeah. So I think right now, and I'll first start by being a little philosophical, is when we think about ESG, my personal belief is that ESG is really a course correction. I fully believe that at some point ESG will be just fully integrated to businesses, right? Right now it's a course correction because there are negative environmental impacts, negative societal impacts that capital-driven companies have on society. So ESG is somewhat of a course correction. That being said, it is generally happens in parallel to business, which means that this is a high-level human effort to go through, understand kind of business transactions, getting data like diversity data from the human resource component, getting carbon data from all the different operations within an organization, and really kind of distinct different subject matter areas across an organization. And then also relating that through double materiality, which is really understanding kind of the environmental impact on a business as well as the business impact on the environment. But these are really broad topics, and it's a big human effort right now to kind of understand all those areas of expertise. When we talk about qualitative and quantitative analysis, there's a large data science component, and then ultimately a big communication piece. So taking all that stuff that you learn about your company, tracking it in real time, as Sue mentioned before, but most importantly, being able to communicate that to key stakeholders. They can help actually make changes in an organization and what they do. So if we look at all of those things to us, and why we started Liminal Data was really, we see a problem here where there's not enough resources or manpower capable to solve some of these challenges or even accurately report it. So I think generative AI is a perfect application for ESG in the current state of ESG today.
Okay, and can you just tell me just a little bit about what the Liminal tool and how that can support an individual working in sustainability?
Sure. Yeah. So what we really do is focus on the workflows of let's say a sustainability manager. So going back to those key points that I mentioned, generally the average ESG team size at a small to medium company is 1, if they're lucky, maybe 2 people. To go out and collect a lot of information from different business units, put that into context, track metrics, calculate metrics that you can track over time to be able to tell what direction you're headed and where you can make improvements, are all substantial efforts. So what we really focus on at Liminal are solving some of these key roadblocks that people run into. So it's the collecting data piece. So rather than passing spreadsheets back and forth and having this very kind of flat file type of data that gets stale really quickly, it's about building API data connectors, which give a programmatic way to get data into a system. From there, we really focus on the data science piece. So continuing with the thread of workflow, it's what does a sustainability manager or ESG manager do next? It's really about quantifying that and being able to contextualize it enough that you can understand what direction you're headed and what an organization may need to improve. I think a really simple example of this is calculating a carbon footprint. It's very complicated. Going back to the data center example, it's understanding where you're buying power from. For instance, can be really conflated. There's different mixes of power that goes into any given power plant. So it might be a mix of coal, it might be a mix of nuclear, hydropower, so on and so forth, all that have different emissions factors. So if you're trying to understand what part of carbon going into the atmosphere that you're responsible for, or other gases for that matter, the math gets really complicated. So we focus on how do we simplify that piece of it. Things like diversity initiatives, labor conditions, things along the social spectrum. If you look at even the governance side, a lot of times it's document heavy. So it could be cybersecurity policies, it could be board governance. A lot of times those are really kind of long, tedious documents. So when we talk about data, it's not just numbers, it's a qualitative analysis. So what we've done at Liminal is created a tool. We use generative AI to help break down that information and really make the job simpler for the people dealing in ESG to understand, to guide their company practices, report to different either regulatory or voluntary frameworks, and really make the lifting as light as possible for those people. We believe that, that's low-level work that a tool should be doing, and an organization should be using technology for that. That allows more thought power to go into, what do we do about this? How do we solve some of the problems? How do we improve our impact on both the environment and society? And then going back to the double materiality concept is also how do we make sure that our business is sustainable through global warming, through different climate risk. So it's a vast amount of information, and it tends to be something that more than a team of people can handle. So we focus on building the technology, the data science aspect of that. And then to my point earlier is we do believe that ESG will be folded more into business. So what we're setting ourselves up to is really be that data science tool that can start to branch out and do other things beyond ESG.
Okay, thank you for that. And can you talk about how generative AI can relate to ESG reporting?
Sure. Yeah. So I think ESG reporting and ESG are 2 separate things. So to me, ESG is really about building better practices. I think reporting is a way to build a framework and to, one, publicly disclose, so you build trust with the public, with your key stakeholders, but also make sure that you comply with different regulation. At the end of the day, regulation is meant to kind of normalize how companies do this so that we can bring everyone up in tandem and have a broader impact on society and the environment. I think if we think about the reporting, so I focus a lot about the inputs and kind of the workflow of how do you get that data, what do you do with it. I think now it's like those toys when you're little where you have to put the square the square peg in a square hole. It's about fitting that and showing that from a reporting perspective that you're reporting and communicating those key points that people are asking for. With a lot of the legislation, for instance, in Europe right now, that's driving different business practices across Europe, but also in America. We're an American-based company that does work all over the world. But it's important, really reporting stands for that communication piece. So if you're going to do work with a large company like General Motors or say Google, for instance, it's important to be able to communicate or report through ESG means to those companies to show that you have an alignment with what they're trying to do and help them meet their compliance as well.
Okay, thank you for that, Don. I'd like to call Sue back onto the show now. I don't know if you can quickly answer Eric's question there, Don, or
sure. Yeah. Yeah, we focus on double materiality. I would say it's customer dependent. We work with the customer, so a lot of customers have very simple needs. They're just starting out with reporting and a sustainability initiative, but ultimately we're building a pathway to double materiality.
Thank you, Don. I'd like to have a quick chat with Sue now. Oh, by the way, we did do a show on double materiality a few months ago, if anyone's interested. So, hello, Sue. Good to have you back. Sue Turner is dedicated. Sue Turner OBE is dedicated to using her expertise in AI and data governance and ethics to inspire people and organizations to use AI with wisdom and integrity. She is rated in the world's top 100 women in AI ethics and was one of the first 14 people globally to be accredited in the Foundation of Independent Audit of AI Systems. With both a law degree and an MSc in Artificial Intelligence and Data Science, she established AI Governance Limited in 2020 to advise businesses and policymakers on pragmatic AI, data ethics and governance issues and making a positive societal impact. She's a board chair and non-executive director for purpose-driven businesses in regulated industries and a mentor on the Turing Institute's Skills Policy Awards. Her career spans entrepreneurial private businesses and not-for-profit organizations, where she has led significant organizational growth, raised 27 million for charity, and collaborated to shift power to help people improve their prospects. She was awarded the OBE in 2021 for services to social justice. So, Sue, can you tell me, please, what are the 7 pillars of responsible AI?
Yeah, so the 7 pillars are widely accepted as being what you need to think about when you want to use AI responsibly. And there is no one definition of what these 7 pillars would be, and there's nobody's sort of accepted one framework, but we've distilled it at AI Governance down to the 7 things, which are, first of all, accountability. Secondly, human agency and oversight. Then there's the technical side, so technical robustness and safety. Privacy and data governance. Then you've got transparency and explainability. Diversity, non-discrimination and fairness, that's the bias side that people talk about a lot. And then there's social and environmental well-being that we've been talking about. So just to give you one quick example, you could have a human resources team in a company that are using generative AI to hyper-personalize the training and development for employees based on their role, based on their learning style. So we've all been through it in the past where you've been sent on a generic training course and you don't get very much out of it. The course content, the methods are the same for everybody. When we hyper-personalize, we only give people the training that actually they need, and we make it so that it's tailored for them, the way they learn, the things that are actually going to really stick in their minds and click with them. And the question's got to be, if we're doing that, well, what sort of data are we using to train the system? Is it just internal data, like appraisals that your boss has given you? Maybe there's attendance data, maybe there's some performance metrics in there, or what you say on the internal communication system, what other people say about you, maybe your social media from outside the organisation as well. So there's a lot of ethical decisions there for leaders in an organisation to take to figure out what they will and won't do, what data they will use, what data they won't use. And then, of course, we've got regulation that comes into this as well. So data protection regulations say that you have the right to opt out of automated decision making where it significantly affects you, and perhaps where there's no human review. And what we see in lots of companies is they're kind of forgetting to look at these bigger issues, this responsible AI. They're just saying, oh, this is exciting, we can tailor the training, let's go ahead and do it. Where perhaps they should think a bit more broadly. Just to give you one example, in New York last year, new regulations came in that said you had to have an independent audit of the algorithms you're using in human resources for things like this. But hardly anybody's had one of those audits done, not because they're not using AI in these ways, but because there's a little catch-all in the regulation that says if you have human oversight of the use of technology, you don't need to have the audit done. So there's a really good example there of when people are saying, well, we'll just kind of work our way around the system and pretend that we're using things wisely, but actually, are they? We don't know. And there's no real independent way to catch people when they're doing it wrong or motivate them to do it right.
Thank you, Sue. Now, can you just explain what has all that got to do with ESG? So the 7 pillars of responsible AI, what's that got to do with ESG then?
Right. Well, it's at the heart of ESG, really. I mean, it's all about governance, all those 7 pillars, right the way from accountability through to thinking about the social and environmental impacts. That's all about governing your organisation well. So it's really sort of seeing ESG working in practice when you're using AI properly and using a framework like this. The G, for example, in ESG, well, we know that lots of leaders focus on how much money they can make from using generative AI. But most executives don't actually think that they're going to be able to make money from it soon. It's estimated most leaders think it'll take 5 years before they capture full value from their generative AI investments. And it's really hard before you've even started an AI project to evidence what the return on investment is going to be. Deloitte have done some research recently that shows 80% of boards have limited or no experience of AI, and only 23% of board members are satisfied by how much time their board is spending on AI issues. So that's really just pointing up that the governance piece of AI isn't there on most boards. Plus, it's really hard to keep up with regulation. In the last 7 years alone, 130 countries have proposed at least one AI-related law. So far, just this year, 45 US states have introduced AI-related bills. So when you're thinking about governance, you're thinking about leadership trying to keep up with all these changes, they're really failing at the moment. So that framework helps them to think about what they need to do and get back on track. The S in ESG, we've talked about earlier on, these are powerful tools. They can harm people. They can harm society. So we need to prompt the organisations to think about how they're using those tools in ways that benefit society, or at least try and quantify the harm. And then the E in ESG, again, we've talked about the environmental side. If we use generative AI tools for ideas on how to coming up with ideas for how to reduce our environmental impact, that could be really interesting. But training the model that we use could have the same carbon footprint as 5 cars over their entire lifespan. So we need to be pushing again on this one to find more efficient ways to use these tools without affecting the environment. So our brains, incredibly efficient processing machine, partly because the neurons in our head aren't firing all the time. They're quite often in a sort of static state, and then they fire up when they need to do something. That's not the way we've built our computer neural networks, our large language models and other technology, because there we've got all the neurons firing all the time. So if we can find ways to be more efficient, then that's going to be a very positive thing for the future. And the other area on the environment that we want people to think about more is the hardware. So the infrastructure for AI that we're using, like these graphical processing units that can process lots of information in parallel, they use a lot of rare earth minerals and other resources. And there's a concern that what happens when we want to upgrade to the latest processing unit that comes onto the market, well, we chuck the old one away. So we're building in obsolescence to these and chucking away precious material. So the E, S and G really tie in with that whole framework of thinking how to use these tools responsibly.
Okay, thank you, Sue. So you mentioned earlier that everyone's neurons are all fire. Well, mine are. My neurons fire all the time. Anyway, can you just tell me a little bit about using AI with wisdom and integrity?
Yeah, this is just so important. Years back, I was talking to corporates about the ideas behind ESG adoption, and that was when I was working for a charity, and we wanted to get more companies to think about the impact that they could have. But a lot of them didn't. What we've got on the screen there is the graphic of responsible AI. So that's the responsible AI framework with those 7 pillars that I was talking about earlier on. Might be useful if people want to take a screen grab of that. So using AI with wisdom and integrity, well, what I found was an ESG 10 years ago more, there were only really a few enlightened leaders that got the idea that they could do this anyway without regulation. And it's the same with AI. We have very few regulations outside things like data protection and intellectual property, or maybe in some sectors like financial services, we've got consumer duty that push leaders to do the right thing. So what we need to do is motivate people to do the right thing just because they can, not because they have to. Just yesterday, the Australian Information Commissioner published details about a case where a retailer had used AI-powered facial recognition to try to detect shoplifters coming into their stores. And you can see why, as a retailer, you go, aha, we can cut shoplifting if we can spot these bad people coming into the stores. And the tech can be extremely good at doing that. Where they'd gone wrong was that they hadn't told customers, innocent customers potentially coming into the store, that they were harvesting their data this way, they were analysing it. Nobody had given informed consent. So they got wrapped over the knuckles by the Information Commissioner in Australia. And we've seen that in the UK as well, where a leisure centre group was fined for using CCTV images to log people in and out of work, rather than them using a card or any other technology. Technology can do the job, but there's often other simpler, less intrusive ways of doing it. So as leaders, we could use technology in ways that infringe on people's safety and their rights, but should we? So wisdom and integrity it's all about foreseeing the issues that new technology could bring and having the integrity to live up to the values that we espouse as organisations when we're tempted to use technology to cut costs or to make money.
Okay, thank you for that, Sue. We do really need to think about wrapping up now. I don't know whether let's pull John back on. I don't know if you've got a few more minutes. If you need to go, just say so. But what I thought we would do, I just wanted to define a few terms, and I thought we'd alternate it. So rather than asking you both to define each term, I'll ask one of you to. And agentic AI. What's agentic AI when it's at home? Who wants to tell me what that is?
I'll go ahead. So I particularly don't like this term because I think it confuses a lot of people. But what I like to do is break it down and think about it as an agent. It's really about making an AI agent and trusting it with some autonomy. A really good example of this is Tesla, right? When you give control over to a Tesla in autopilot mode, you're making it be an agent and using AI as decision-making for how to drive and navigate roadways. So it's more, I would say it's kind of a derivative of generative AI in the sense that, you have trust to a level where you're trusting it to make decisions. This has different applications for Liminal. We're on this path where we're trying to make agentic AI that can make decisions on the process of collecting data that I referred to before, and ultimately kind of shortcutting some of the work that otherwise humans would be doing. But I think the key word there is just focusing on the agent piece and realizing that it's raising the level of trust to AI, that you're trusting an AI system to become an agent for you and have some autonomy.
Okay, thanks for that, Don. And Sue, what are LLMs?
Okay, so LLMs, large language models. This is this concept that we can suck in a huge amount of data and build a machine, a model, that we can then do all sorts of clever things with. So it's at the heart of generative AI. And the idea came from a research paper in 2017, so quite a while ago now, which figured out how you could keep attention on things that the computer had seen sometime in the past and use them to make the prediction in the future. I've got a book behind me which is called Uncanny Valley, which shows in the world before LLMs how computers could just lose track. If you ask them to produce a recipe for baking a Victoria sponge cake, and the old style of AI, which we still use a lot, would kind of lose track, lose its thread. But these large language models are really brilliant at holding on to their thread, keeping the pattern going and understanding what they were asked to predict in the first place. Paragraphs and paragraphs later, they're still on track and they're still focused. So yeah, large language models right now, they're at the heart of generative AI. I would predict 3 years in the future, we'll be talking about something completely different, and large language models will seem like ancient history.
Okay, so in 3 years' time, LLMs will be ancient history, a bit like the pyramids, I suppose. What is explainable AI? Does anyone want to explain that one super quick?
Sure. Yeah, I'll take this. It's really about forming a methodology around AI and breaking it down into components, so it's not a black box where you prompt it and then you just get an answer and you don't know how you derive that. I compare it to school days when you didn't get credit for just giving an answer to a math problem. You had to have a stepwise approach that showed every conclusion that you came to and built up to that answer. It's the same thing with AI. It's really putting that into practice so that people understand really the decision-making process of the AI systems so that there's trust and transparency.
If I can jump in on that as well, it's also really important. It's one of those 7 pillars of responsible AI that we can explain things to people when they're coming into contact with AI. So we're transparent. We tell them that they are coming into contact with AI, and then we explain it in a way that they can understand. And that can be really hard because some of these models, as technologists, we don't know how they've reached the decision that they've come to. There is no pattern, like a sort of decision tree that we can follow. It's too obscure. But we need to somehow translate what they've done, how they've made a decision about whether Michael gets a mortgage or doesn't get a mortgage, in language that people actually understand when they're coming into contact with these tools. And that's part of what we call AI literacy. So giving people the language and the tools to understand what these complex machines are doing.
Okay, thank you for that. We really do need to end quite soon, but I just wanted to ask you, can generative AI be used as a tool to combat misinformation, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. It goes back to the idea of lying and hallucinations with AI. I think it's more important to recognize that humans lie, right? And there's usually poor intent behind that. So a lot of misinformation, it can be intentional or it can be unintentional. But I think AI presents us an opportunity with a tool that can combat that. In the ESG world, there's a lot of ESG greenwashing claims. There were a few notable ones in the US that were in the news last week. And I think AI is a great tool to bring some of those to light and prevent that from happening and prevent the spread of misinformation. And then you can kind of extrapolate that to the political universe as well.
Yeah, I think Don's right on that. I saw a presentation recently. I was in the room with a major news organisation that was talking about how they're using AI for many different purposes, but this was one of the ways that they're using it to try and predict what is truth and what is perhaps twisted in some way or deliberately faked. So technology is being used more and more with this, but there's always the opposite side, as Don was saying earlier. Somebody will come up with an evil way of using it for every good way that we come up with. So the fight of the machines to tell good from evil is on. I hope the good side wins.
I wonder if the generative AI could be a little bit like Jiminy Cricket, in Pinocchio. Jiminy Cricket was Pinocchio's conscience. Maybe generative AI could be our conscience. Maybe it could be like our parents, you shouldn't be doing that. Oh, you're having another drink. You really should be doing, or something a little bit naughtier than that. I don't know. But can we sum up? Can I give you 60 seconds each to say what you want to say about generative AI and ESG, or generative AI and life, the universe, and everything? Really, Don.
Sure. Yeah. So what I would say is I think that one of the most unique things about generative AI is really how quickly it came to market. I've been working with AI and building different tool applications in AI for the last 14 years. No one really cared about it until the last 2 years. It was generally something that happened in the background. I think with generative AI, it becomes more human. There's a human machine interface where you're prompting it, you're asking it questions, and there's a real interaction. I think we don't exactly know what all the ramifications of that will be. So I think guidance, using responsible frameworks and governance and having some regulation around it is going to be important. What I would say where a lot of organizations that I talk to are making mistakes are that they just say, no, we're not going to use AI in our organization. And I think to some of the points we made earlier is there will no doubt be either wealth, income, or other disparities. And I think there is a little bit of wave to ride right now that's important to at least understand it. I think take a stepwise approach to it, understand where it can be beneficial. It doesn't mean you have to unleash generative AI on your entire organizations, but perhaps there are kind of discrete applications, things like ESG reporting, for instance, where you can start to introduce it, really cut costs, increase productivity, and have a responsible approach and get your organization accustomed to AI. But I think the power is in the hand of the beholder here. And I think getting out in front of it, building up some governance around it is that you're not going to stop generative AI at this point. So it's better to embrace it and have a responsible approach for it and start bringing it into your organization now.
Okay, thank you. And Sue, you've got 60 seconds on life, the universe and everything, starting from now.
Okay, well, fortunately, we know the answer's 42. Apart from that, yeah, learn about generative AI. You know, these tools are out there. They can do some amazing things. They can really excite people. What I find when I'm doing sessions with leadership in groups, and there's always somebody around the table who's very negative to start off with, because they don't understand it. So when we train people, talk to them about what these tools can do, those most negative people usually end up being the ones who are most excited and the ones who are coming out with really brilliant ideas and the ones who are thinking about the risks. So they're not just jumping in with both feet and thinking it's all going to be perfect. Absolutely, Don, spot on. Don't ban these tools because that's just a fool's way of working. We always have a 10-step approach to working with organisations so they see the value and really focus in on what problems does the organisation have that could be solved if they could predict, personalise or automate things. So focus on the problems and solving them, and then really train people. You know, you've got amazing people in your organisation who are fantastic experts at doing the job in the way it's been done for the past 10 years. Make them into the people who know the tools, understand the tools, and can be fantastic at doing the job for the next 10 years. And of course, above all, harness the power of these amazing generative AI tools with wisdom and integrity always.
Okay, well, thank you both of you for your wisdom and your integrity today. Thank you very much. And for everybody watching, see you all again soon.